Okay. We're very grateful again to Danny Seabright, the president and CEO of the U.S U.A.E. Business Council, for joining us, as well as Rebecca Rosen, who is the energy industry expert for the U.S U.A.E. Business Council. Also very grateful to Courtney Ray, who leads all of World Trade Center Utah's international programming. Looking at the participant list right now, it looks like just about everybody participated in the general session that we did yesterday. And I just saw somebody popped up in a chat that said, it looks like I'm on mute. Can anybody hear me right now?
I can hear you.
Okay, good. Very good. Okay. Hopefully we're through all the technical challenges for this morning. But anyways, it looks like most of you were able to join us yesterday in the general session. Danny led a great overview of the UAE economy, why the U.S. UAE business relationship is so strong, and the opportunities to grow and increase that with time. If you weren't able to join, please reach out. We can get you the slides for that so that you can get caught up and get that information. Before jumping in today, I just wanted to reiterate for anybody who wasn't listening in yesterday, why are we doing this? Why do we do trade missions in general? And why are we doing a virtual trade mission right now? Well, many businesses are just trying to figure out how to survive due to the effects of COVID-19. So first off, why trade missions in general? We do trade missions to help open up opportunities, open doors, generate momentum, and help Utah companies increase their international sales and to connect with partners in other markets that can either provide a capital investment or be a partner in helping that company grow. We also do it to help represent the state of Utah internationally. Just last week, we were supposed to be in the UAE with 60 companies, with the governor, with the president of the Senate. But of course, that got derailed like everybody's plans this spring. And so now we're focusing in on virtual trade missions and virtual introductions. We want to make sure that as we here in Utah look at the stabilization phase and the recovery phase of our economic response to COVID-19, that we are helping companies identify new sources of revenue. We are going to come out of this thing. We are going to bounce back. Utah is going to continue to have the best economy in the United States as our companies identify new sources of revenue as they continue to grow, as we remain aggressive in our international engagement, even as companies in many other parts of the country and the world are continuing to hunker down during COVID-19. And so we're going to be doing this one, a series of breakout sessions today. We have a session with Saudi Arabia tomorrow. Courtney is working on similar webinars with Canada, China, and Israel. So make sure you stay tuned for the programming that we have upcoming throughout May and June and into July, because we're going to continue to work very hard to create these opportunities for Utah companies. Without further ado, let's jump into today's program. You'll notice today that we are organized as a meeting, not a webinar, which means that any of you can wave your hand, unmute yourself, jump in, ask questions. We want to make this just like we would be doing if we were in Abu Dhabi or Dubai right now, which is sitting around a conference room. Danny's going to provide some introductory remarks and an overview of the energy industry. Rebecca Rosen is going to be adding to that as well. At which point, we'll want to make sure that we have ample time to answer your questions. This is your opportunity to connect with two of the best experts on opportunities in the UAE, two of the people that are most well connected. Danny and Rebecca and the team, they can open up any door in the UAE. They can get you with who you need to get with. And so this is a phenomenal opportunity, not only to get kind of general intelligence, but specific advice for your company, build a relationship that then can help you connect with the people you need to connect with so you can grow your business in the UAE. So Danny, thank you again for being with us this morning and for a series of our breakouts today. Today's a bit of a marathon day when it comes to our use of Zoom, but we're looking forward to it. So Danny, I'll go ahead and turn the time over to you, and I look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thanks, Miles. Thanks, Courtney. Thanks to you and your team for all that you're doing, excuse me, to help set up these sessions. I'm going to just give you a few opening remarks, then I'll turn it over to Rebecca to sort of walk through our presentation. And there will be some slides that are going to be put up. I think David's doing them right now as we speak. So if someone does have a burning question that needs to be answered during this sort of 10-minute overview, please interrupt. Otherwise, we'll just hold and try to answer all your questions at the end. And I'd also like to understand at the end a little bit about some of your some of the key companies on the call and what your interests are in with regard to the UAE as well. That always helps us. Just real quickly, we've been in existence for almost 14 years now. We were created by at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce 14 years ago when the UAE government came to the U.S. and said that they had a problem in better understanding the UAE's goals and objectives with regard to the Dubai Ports World crisis that had occurred at that time. We stayed at the Chamber for a year and then decided that it would be better for us and for our mission to be an independent nonprofit, and so we went out of the Chamber about a year later and have been very, very successful ever since. We have a great relationship still with the Chamber, but that's our DNA. We're a nonprofit 501c6 set up in Washington, D.C., and in normal times, I spend half my time on airplanes going back and forth to the UAE to work with our partners in these various verticals. The oil and gas energy vertical is obviously one of the most important to the UAE economy and to our relationship, our business relationship with the UAE. It has been for many years since oil was first discovered in the UAE over 60-some years ago, 50-some years ago. The vertical, we are partners. We have members of all the key companies in the vertical, including ADNOC and many of its subsidiaries, including all of the U.S. primes and many of the smaller companies on the U.S. side that partner with the UAE. So in that regard, we can not only help you connect with key players in the UAE, on the UAE side in government and industry, but with the key offices of the American companies that have the lion's share of the business there so far. And for many second and third tier companies, partnering with those American firms or understanding from those American firms first and foremost how business is done and what the priorities are is a really important thing to accomplish if you're looking and you're thinking about doing business in the UAE in the future. With that, Rebecca, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you provide sort of an overview here, the first few minutes of some of the slides, and I'll jump in to reinforce and interject any key points that I think are important, and then we can do the Q&A at the end. So over to you, Rebecca, and thanks for your help on this.
Excellent. Thank you, Danny. Pardon me. So to begin with, as you all probably know, the United Arab Emirates is one of the world's largest oil producers. At the time of the OPEC Plus deal, the UAE was reportedly pumping, or producing rather, 4.1 million barrels per day. And for the past 3 years, it has been pumping around 3 million barrels per day. Oil exports account for about 25% of the UAE's GDP, and this percentage has decreased as the UAE has sought to diversify into new sectors over the past couple of decades. The UAE is home to the world's 6th or 7th largest proven oil and gas reserves, and the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company is the most important actor in this sector, as it is responsible for the vast majority of the UAE's oil production.
I'll just interject there. The Abu Dhabi is one of 7 emirates, and most of the oil reserves are in that emirate. That's why Abu Dhabi is more or less the leader of the country. It has been traditionally. It's been the strongest tribe, if you will, but it's also for the last 50 years where all the oil revenue and reserve has been located. Go ahead, Rebecca.
Exactly. Over the last several years, the UAE has instituted dramatic reforms to its oil and gas sector. The UAE is seeking to increase output from 3 million barrels per day to 5 million barrels per day by 2030. And it is also trying to become self-sufficient in gas production. Currently, the UAE imports gas via the Dolphin pipeline from Qatar. And despite the severance of relations between the two countries, self-sufficiency in gas production will involve unlocking new sources of gas, including unconventional gas reserves. Actually, in February of this year, the UAE announced a new gas find with 80 trillion standard cubic feet of shallow gas resources. ADNOC and the Dubai Supply Authority signed an agreement to explore and develop resources in that area. And the UAE is also expanding its refining and petrochemical operations. ADNOC's refining capabilities are currently set at 922,000 barrels per day, and it plans to triple petrochemical production to 14.4 million tons annually. And the UAE has a long history of welcoming private sector and foreign investment into its upstream oil and gas exploration and production sectors. Major US companies, including ExxonMobil and Occidental Petroleum, have inked partnerships with Abu Dhabi. The UAE has been diversifying its relationships with others outside of the West. And the UAE has also been welcoming new types of investment and partnerships. For example, in 2019, BlackRock, along with the buyout firm KKR, bought a 40% stake in ADNOC's oil pipelines for $4 billion. And in 2018, Baker Hughes GE acquired a 5% stake in ADNOC Drilling as part of a strategic agreement between the two that will enable and support the growth and development of ADNOC Drilling into a fully integrated drilling and well construction provider. In 2017, ADNOC listed a stake in its fuel distribution unit, ADNOC Distribution, and what was the biggest listing on the Abu Dhabi Stock Exchange in the past decade. The UAE also serves as a base for many international oil companies, as it is centrally located and serves as the region's travel hub. The current global glut of oil has seen repercussions for the oil and gas industry. The UAE has committed to reduce its oil output per the OPEC Plus deal. ADNOC told contractors and suppliers in March that it will review existing deals to find ways to cut costs. The letter was sent to many companies dealing with ADNOC firms, including involved in oil and technical services, engineering, project services, and drilling, sources said. And ADNOC's in-country value has been a challenge for some American companies. And the in-country value program, also commonly known as ICV, was introduced by ADNOC in 2017. And the goal of this program is threefold. The first being Emiratization, which is creating more employment opportunities for Emiratis in the private sector. Two, supporting the UAE's goal of economic diversification through sourcing more goods and services within the United Arab Emirates. And three, strategically considering localizing critical parts of the value chain for certain categories. So companies that bid on contracts must declare their ICV achievement, which is also known as an ICV certificate.
Let me interrupt here, Rebecca. So this is an area that has proved problematic for some of the bigger firms, but actually for smaller medium enterprise companies that come in and want to have business in the UAE, they have found that they can partner with the bigger American firms and help those bigger American firms provide, increase their ICV content by some of the programs and technologies that they bring to the table. So that's another way that larger American companies are looking to partner with smaller firms in as subs to some of the overall big contracts that they have. Go ahead, Rebecca.
Yes, exactly. So new bids are looked upon favorably if they're associated with a company that does locally manufacture goods and produces local services or hires Emirati nationals. And the challenges of ICV have actually been compounded by competition from China, because American companies cannot compete with Chinese companies on price. However, they can compete with China on quality. So beyond oil and gas, it is important to note that the UAE has embraced clean energy. In 2017, the UAE launched its Energy Strategy 2050, which is an ambitious clean energy plan. The plan aims to increase the contribution of clean energy in the overall energy mix from 25 to 50% and decrease the carbon footprint of power generation by 70% before 2050. Specifically, the strategy aims for the UAE's energy mix in 2050 to comprise 44% renewable energy, primarily solar, and 6% nuclear energy. This year, the UAE brought online its first nuclear reactor, and it is the first of 4 nuclear reactors that they have at the Breakout nuclear power plant. So the key players on the UAE side, like I said before, ADNOC, and there's also the Emirates National Oil Company and Crescent Petroleum. And major US partners of ADNOC are ExxonMobil, and they're one of the largest US investors in Abu Dhabi. And their focus is primarily on the Upper Zakum oil field off the coast of Abu Dhabi, and Occidental Petroleum. Oxy has a 30-year joint venture with ADNOC on Al Hosn gas, which is one of the largest natural gas developments in the region. And in 2019, they were awarded a 35-year concession to explore and develop onshore Block 3, which is adjacent to the Al Hosn gas field. They also participate in Dolphin Energy, which is a trans-border natural gas project in the region between the UAE, Oman, and Qatar. And other ADNOC partners include Shell, Total, BP, the Japan Oil Development Company, and Mitsui, Korea National Oil Company and GS Energy, Borealis, Lind Group, CNPC, and Zenhua Oil. U.S. oil and gas companies that use the UAE as their regional headquarters, even if they don't have significant interest in the UAE, and Chevron is a prime example of that. And U.S.-based engineering, procurement, and construction contractors based in the UAE also do significant work in the oil and gas sector. And for example, Fluor, they're one of our member companies.
Just again to interrupt here if I could, the focus of our brief today has been everything that the UAE is doing in oil and gas and energy in the UAE. But many of the UAE's sovereign wealth funds, particularly Mubadala, which consolidated with a few other sovereign wealth funds over the last few years to now be a $300 billion fund, are significantly invested abroad in energy. In a number of foreign countries abroad, both in clean energy and in oil and gas. And in that regard, there's opportunities for American companies to participate with some of these UAE sovereign wealth funds in working in some of these investments that they have in foreign countries. Go ahead, Rebecca, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay, thank you. In terms of avenues of engagement, we encourage you to speak to companies in your network that have a presence in the UAE. And as Danny expressed earlier, the best way to get involved in the UAE or in the region at large is to become a subcontractor to a major oil company that is bidding on a project. And we do want to note that both the Emiratis and Saudis often prefer American companies and want more companies from the US to participate. However, they are always concerned about costs. And it is always advisable to bring innovative solutions to your projects. And it is absolutely critical to take time to build relationships with your Emirati counterpart. Additionally, we do encourage individuals to attend industry events. Here's just 3 that we have highlighted. The first being the Abu Dhabi International Petroleum Exhibition and Conference, which is happening in November of this year. I do want to highlight that they are having a webinar on May 4th regarding energy supply and demand dynamics. So if you go to the ADIPEC website, it is actually the first banner that's on the website, and you can sign up there if you're interested in doing that. The next is the Water, Energy, Technology, and Environment exhibition, and that's happening in October of this year. And lastly, there is Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week, which has already taken place this year, and it will take place in January of next year. And lastly, we have a couple of resources regarding the space. So the first one is our oil and gas report, and the second one is our clean and alternative energy report. And we would be more than happy to email PDFs of both of those documents to you all if you are interested.
And they're on our website as well, which you can easily access to download.
Yes.
That concludes our prepared remarks. Courtney, I think Courtney, Miles, we're ready for any discussion, questions from the audience. And again, as part of the questions from the audience, I'd really like to learn a little bit more about your companies. So if you do ask a question or two, please just give us a sentence or two about what your company does and what your interest is in the UAE. Thank you.
That's great, and thank you very much, Danny and Rebecca. And Courtney, before we jump into the Q&A, I just would be curious. I think one question that is, I think, on everybody's mind, and your insight, Rebecca, would be helpful, is right now we've got historic low oil prices. That's tied to COVID, but there are some other effects of COVID outside of low oil prices as well. Can you talk about a little bit about what you think the impact will be of low oil prices in terms of the UAE's energy industry? Is this a something that will pass? Is it something that may impact production, but they're still going to be doing new projects? They're still going to need new subs, and therefore there's continuing to be opportunity for U.S. companies. Would be curious to get some of your thoughts on that. And then after that, Courtney, let's go ahead and jump into the Q&A with everybody else.
Sure. Look, the fight with Russia and the engagement with Russia on price and demand is something rather historic, actually, with regard to OPEC and the U.S. and what's going on with our producers here at home. There's a lot of people that the conspiracy theory people out there would say that Russia and OPEC are conspiring to drive U.S. shale production out of the marketplace. I don't agree with that in any way, shape, or form. But I will say to you, the Emiratis are probably some of the best planners there are, and across all of their verticals. And in oil and gas, they and the Saudis, with regard to their company combined, are some of the best and most sophisticated planners in the oil and gas vertical at large. And I believe that Emiratis will weather this. The Saudis will weather this just fine. Of course, there will be changes that they will have to make to their economic planning and their budgeting, for sure. My experience over 30 years with both countries is they do a really good job of that. Maybe the Saudis lag a little bit, but they do a pretty good job. The Emiratis, for sure, do a pretty good job of it. I would say to you, in having our co-chairman on the call 2 weeks ago, the co-chairman of our board, who's the number 2 at Mubadala and the head of a lot of their strategic investments, the Emiratis are looking at this period as a time they're sitting on a huge war chest of cash, and they're looking at this as a time to make strategic investments in a number of verticals, including energy, going forward. And he made that very clear on our call 2 weeks ago. And I know that I've talked to the senior executives at ADNOC, including the CEO, and I know that they're thinking in a similar way. So while there might be a little bit of a slowdown in the marketplace at the moment, this is certainly a good time to try and start building those relationships that might be required, and to bring to the fore any interesting, innovative applications that any American companies might have for the downstream and the upstream of the oil cycle, the energy cycle. I'll stop there.
That's great perspective. Thank you, Danny. Okay, Courtney, over to you. And as others jump in to ask questions, please share, just a quick overview of what your company does, because that will help calibrate Danny and Rebecca's responses.
Great. So I'm just going to take some of the questions that have come in the last few days, and then obviously anyone else feel free to jump in. Danny, I know, Rebecca, you had sort of briefly talked about nuclear and renewables, and obviously that's been a focus before everything happened with this oil crisis, but can you just touch on that a little bit more? You went through that pretty quickly, but just what are they focusing on that even more in light of what's happening? What are opportunities in that area? If you can focus on that, that would be helpful.
Becca, why don't you touch on nuclear, and then I'll do a little bit more on renewables.
Sure, that sounds good. So the nuclear power plant is like going to be very important to their energy mix. Like I said, the first of the 4 reactors have come online this year. And currently they are working to bring the actual like reactor online to provide energy to the populace. But it will take some time on that front. And in terms of nuclear, they already have some U.S. partners, but I'm sure like any U.S. suppliers would be able to potentially work with U.A.E, which is the company in the UAE that suppliers work with.
Who are the U.S. companies? Just as I know you guys had talked about, you want to partner with the U.S. companies.
Yes.
So Westinghouse is the main company that's been partnered with the Emiratis in building the reactors, and now they're looking. The focus now for the Emiratis is how to sustain and run the reactors going forward. So those are the areas where they have partnerships in place, but they're still looking for more capability. The second and third and fourth reactor are 85 to 95% complete, all 3 of them. And they're all going to be open one after another over the next 3 years in sort of succession. So that piece of it is done. But the sustainment and the operation going forward is again, the Emiratis are continuing to look for new partners and new opportunities for business.
Yeah, so supplies and training are probably like the 2 like critical avenues here.
As I mentioned on the call yesterday, also in the education piece, with regard to STEM and making sure that they have enough nuclear physicists and nuclear energy operators that are increasingly homegrown and trained in the UAE to help run and manage the program indefinitely into the future. Regarding renewables, their big focus in the UAE is obviously solar. They have some of the biggest solar plants in the world already in operation. They have the cheapest per kilowatt hour of any solar producer anywhere in the world, and as a result of that, the Saudis have started buying their solar production, and they're teamed with the Saudis in creating solar plants in Saudi Arabia. They also built solar plants, solar production facilities in other countries around the world, including the U.S. And in other countries, not in the UAE, they're doing work on wind as well. Those are their 2 main areas where their sovereign wealth funds and some of their other energy companies, Masdar, their renewable energy company, is focused on renewables, renewable energy sources.
Great, thank you. And are there any, if they wanted to partner with someone in solar or wind, are there any companies in particular that would be helpful, since you were saying that's important?
So the first go-to company is Masdar, which is their clean energy company that was created in Abu Dhabi. There are others, and we could help connect you with those. But the companies or the government entities that are responsible for electricity and water generation in the Emirates. So it would be what used to be called Adwiya in Abu Dhabi and what's called DEWA still today, Dubai Electricity Water Authority in Dubai. They're partnering with those government entities that are the government producers, if you will, and suppliers are also places to go and to talk and to learn and understand what the requirements are.
Great.
They're very focused on efficiencies and digital in the energy sector, in generation and bringing to the household, to the last mile, the most up-to-date, most efficient, using the most efficient technologies possible in providing electricity and water resource in the Emirates.
Okay, we have a question that came in saying there's a person who represents an inline pipeline inspection company that has top quality pipeline inspection services. And he said, what services exist regarding pipeline inspection and diagnostics?
Well, okay, you're getting down into a little bit into the weeds or the detail where I'm not an expert in this vertical. However, Fluor and GE and I could go down the list of a whole bunch of American companies that are all engaged and involved in this sector, helping the Emiratis. Pipeline inspections certainly exist. They have huge pipelines in the UAE. The Chinese actually built the most recent pipeline for them between the west coast and the east coast of the country, if you will, and hasn't worked very well. And they brought in a lot of American companies to help fix it and make it work. So there is that capability there. I would say to you that in all of these verticals, they're very sophisticated users already. They're very advanced and sophisticated. So you bringing to them either something they're already using to make it more competitive in the environment, or bringing a new technology or capability that's cutting edge that they might not have been exposed to yet, would be the two areas where it would be most useful.
Great, thank you. How are the current depressed oil prices impacting energy projects and infrastructure investment and financing?
Well, I would say it's a little too soon to tell. I haven't seen any indication of yet of how. Of course, there's going to be an impact, but I haven't seen yet precisely what those impacts are. I expect after we get through Ramadan and the Eid al-Fitr, which is here on the 24th of May, the holiest holiday of the year for the Muslims, I would expect into June and July we're going to start seeing this roll out and the impact roll out a little bit more and understand better what that is. We don't know yet. There will be, but how severe, what the Emiratis do to mitigate it. This is again their most important cash-generating vertical of the economy. So they're going to take efforts to mitigate the worst effects of a lot of this, for sure.
Interesting. What opportunities, if any, do current oil and gas market conditions present? And what can governments do to help face these challenges and take advantage of these opportunities?
Well, as I said, the Emiratis, Abu Dhabi Inc. Is government and industry combined, and they're sitting on a huge pile of cash. And I think, like as I said, you might see some opportunities to invest in some areas where the price of companies, the price of investments is distressed at the moment. I think they will take advantage of some distress and make some acquisitions in the months ahead. Their government and our government work very closely, coordinate very closely together. The National Security Council in Washington, D.C. and the White House has appointed a representative in the last month from the White House to actually be in the region and coordinate with the Saudis and the UAE energy ministers to work very, very closely on this recent crisis with Russia. But I think she is going to be utilized more and more going forward to coordinate U.S. energy policy with the Saudis and the Emiratis in particular. So there will be opportunities there to use the government forum in that regard.
Okay, thank you. Another question was, is it time to have a new global oil organization beyond OPEC to help address volatility in global oil and gas markets?
Great question, great idea. It's been raised many times before. I think so, but the world is becoming more diffuse in its power centers, in its centers of power, if you will, instead of more combined and orchestrated and organized. So I don't have high hopes that that's going to happen anytime soon. I think we're going to have regional power centers with regard to energy, whether it's Asia, whether it's the Gulf, whether it's South America, Mexico and Venezuela, whether it's us. So
great. I have some more questions. Does anyone else want to ask some of their questions here? I can keep on going, but.
Well, if you don't mind, I'd like to ask a question. So with oil so cheap right now,
Hey, Dave. Sorry for cutting you off. If you could just introduce your company and explain a little bit what Quantum IR does, and then let's jump into the question.
Sure.
Thank you.
Again, Quantum IR, we do thermal scanning of high heat industries. So it's a 360-degree infrared scan, so we can monitor the heat process. And in oil refineries, we have crackers that we need to make sure are maintaining optimal heat. And we do this scientifically with infrared imaging, okay? So we can scan for leaks and make sure that everything's operating in the spec that it needs to be. So my question, first I'll turn off my phone. My question, and hey, everybody likes Earth, Wind, and Fire. Okay, so my question is, with oil pricing so low, when we were in the $20, $30, $40 range, increased optimization was important in the refinery process and all that. At $100 a barrel, people would just let stuff happen, right? So we saw quite a bit of interest as oil prices were going down because optimization was important. Now it's super low price and they can't even store what they got.
Right.
Is there any concern about optimization of their refining process, of the transport, in pipelines? What's your view on that right now?
Well, look, again, I'm not an expert in this field, but I will say to you that the Emiratis, above many that I've worked with, are always looking to drive efficiencies, are always looking to drive optimization. They're always looking to find new opportunities here. Look, demand's going to come back. The world economy is going to restart, whether it's in 3 months or 6 months or 9 months, depending on your view of the world. But we are going to have a demand back, yes, we're going to have excess capacity that's going to have to be used up first. But the world still runs primarily on oil and gas, on these carbon fuels, and the demand will be back. The Mubadala, the UAE Sovereign Wealth Fund in Abu Dhabi, has actually invested, I think, or bought, I should say, I'm just trying to remember the name of it. Maybe David can Google it, or Rebecca can Google it while I'm thinking. The largest cracker in the United States, I want to say it's in Louisiana, and they bought that cracker because of the technology involved and being some of the most advanced in the world. So they are forward-looking and forward-leaning like that, and there are opportunities there. Will the demand or the appetite be so intense right at the moment? Good question, but it's not to say that it's not going to come again, and it's not going to renew in the months ahead. David or Rebecca, do you remember the name of the cracker that Mubadala invested in? And it's not Borealis, is it? I'm just trying to remember the name, but major U.S. cracker company.
It might have been Nova Chemicals. Mubadala.
Nova, that's it. Nova Chemicals. Thank you. That's exactly right. Next question.
One interesting thing that, just riffing on this idea of investment, we've talked about UAE investment in traditional energy, but there's also been a lot of UAE investment in alternative energy in the United States. And that goes back to what Danny was talking about, Masdar. Masdar being this renewable energy agency. They've done a lot of investment in U.S. wind. So that's just an interesting angle to throw out there for those on the call.
They don't invest in wind in the UAE at all because they don't have wind as a real resource. But they have large investments in the UK, in wind, in the US and other places. I think in Germany as well, if I'm not mistaken.
That's really interesting. Thank you, David, for that. Miles, don't we have big wind? I'm relatively new to Utah, but don't we have a fairly large wind capacity here in Utah?
Yeah, we do have quite a bit of wind production. We also have quite a few interesting renewable energy projects. So Enel, the global Italian energy conglomerate, has a large geothermal plant here in Utah. And of course, it's producing energy, but it's also working on innovation and developing new technologies and new processes. Hitachi has a large hydrogen storage project in Utah. We have salt domes, so they're below the ground. Salt domes are very, very good for storing energy. And so you see these global energy players that are making very large scale investments in Utah, thanks to some of the unique geographies that Utah has. We also have many really interesting energy tech companies. Utah has an acute problem with air quality in the Salt Lake City area. Just based off of geography, we've got big mountains on both sides, so the air gets trapped in between those mountains. And so because of that, you see a lot of companies working on how do we make hydrocarbons more efficient, how do we make them cleaner, and how do we optimize diesel engines, vehicle engines, everything else to reduce the emissions that are coming out of them. Utah also has a lot of coal and a lot of oil as well. And so there's a balancing act where there is still a very much a strong sense of recognition that hydrocarbons are important now. They're going to continue to be important. We want to continue to utilize those. The question is just how do we, the extent to which we can make them cleaner and more effective, we're going to be able to make the hydrocarbon resources Utah has more valuable for longer. So I saw we said not to put people on the spot, but I saw Rob Harmon, I think, is on the phone, on the call with DTECT. DTECT is doing really interesting products looking at detecting radiation and other things. Rob, as I think about Utah companies that are doing innovative things and growing internationally, DTECT is one of those companies that comes to mind. Do you have any questions or anything you'd like to get specifically with your company from Danny or Rebecca?
Yes, Miles, can you hear me okay?
Yep, hear you loud and clear.
Very good. So Rob Harmon with DTECT Systems. We manufacture radiation detection equipment in markets for all over the world, including a lot of government military aspects. And of course, some of our equipment is used within the nuclear power plant industry. We're looking to get into those markets a little bit more. And so we were just simply interested into what UAE is doing in terms of their nuclear energy and where they anticipate growing with that. And obviously they use a lot with oil and gas, but nuclear is an energy source that's becoming of interest. Obviously with history in Fukushima, there's always concerns with that, but just curious to know where they anticipate going with that and how much energy they plan to use in the future.
Let me offer you 2 points. Number one, from the get-go, the UAE created its nuclear energy program from a clean sheet of paper and created the book, if you will, on how to do this, how to build a set of reactors under modern, current-day operating constraints, restrictions, environmental. You just go down the list, given all the things that have happened in the nuclear industry over the last few years. They have that book. They're updating it. They've considered taking it and using it in other countries and helping other countries with their nuclear energy programs. But I think it's fair to say that at the moment, they are most focused on getting their own program of 4 reactors down pat, up and operating over the next 4 to 5 years. And I don't think they're going to be going at any foreign countries to create a joint program anytime soon. That said, what you might see in the next 4 to 5 years is some of the Emirati sovereign wealth funds. If there's a good investment to work with a nuclear energy operator in certain foreign country in a project, say for example, if there's a really attractive project coming up in the U.S. for the first time in many years, the Emiratis might be interested if it was allowable to invest some of their sovereign wealth as an investor in one of those programs or reactors. That's the most that I think I would see them do abroad in the next 5 years, not focused on their own project and their own program at home. Excuse me. Okay?
One point of emphasis I might add is the project that they're working on right now, these 4 reactors that they're going to roll out in the next 3 years, are eventually going to account for 25% of the UAE's electricity production. So these are massive projects. And this is a strategic initiative on the part of the UAE to roll these out.
Right, and we had that in our brief for sure earlier, that point. But again, remember, there's 10 million people in the UAE, so they're big programs for the UAE. For sure, and they're going to be a significant part of the UAE's mix. But they're sort of small. In some ways, they're small in comparison to what's being done in China and other countries, in France and other places. Thanks, David. Appreciate it. Next, Miles or Courtney.
I mean, I've got some other questions, but I think most of them have generally been answered by what you all prepared. I think, Miles, do you have anything else, or does anyone else want to say anything, or we can wrap up, I think?
I'm gonna put at least one more person on the spot. I see Joseph Spence is on the call. Joseph is yesterday a little point of interest. It's always kind of fun to have somebody like Wesley Snipes dive into one of our webinars. Joseph is Wesley's business partner. Joseph operates out of Utah, but is really global in nature, does a lot of investments, and has put a lot of time and energy thinking about and working on investing in clean technologies, innovative cities. And Joseph, I'd be curious, I know that you've looked at the UAE. Obviously, this is an area where they've been leading out, thinking about renewable technologies and how to make cities cleaner and safer. I just would be curious, I think Danny and his team would benefit from hearing just a little bit about what you're working on. And then if you've got a question, I think, Danny, your point earlier about Mubadala, viewing this in here and now as an opportunity to make investments is something that resonated with me as I think about some of the companies that we're working with that I know have really innovative technologies, but could use some additional capital. And I imagine, Joseph, that also resonated with you. So Joseph, if you wouldn't mind, over to you, quick update on what you're working on. And then if you've got a question for Danny and his team.
Thank you very much, Miles. Very humbled by the introduction and appreciate this esteemed audience. There's a little bit of noise in the background, which is why I didn't raise my hand earlier to this point, but I think we can manage through it. So just, very briefly, there are a number of large-scale smart city projects, both within Utah as well as in multiple other states and countries such as India, Japan, and Korea, that I'm currently working to catalyze, that I think would be wonderful partners for some of the large-scale smart renewable city projects that are happening within the UAE. So certainly interested in digging into more details with those projects. But more immediately, I'm also doing, as part of this work around smart sustainable cities, additional work in next generation nuclear facilities. So I understand that the UAE has these large reactor projects where we focus on small modular next generation nuclear reactors that really can be deployed anywhere and can be manufactured from a singular location and then shipped out, actually. So there's significant efficiencies in the manufacturing process and the operating and maintenance process and the upfront investment process that we've innovated around. And so a very interesting with how you are looking at nuclear energy strategically and growing that interest in many other countries through next-gen nuclear technologies.
That's great. Thank you, Joseph, for that. And Danny, I think to kind of amplify the question there, Joseph is working on lots of these really innovative, groundbreaking technologies, growing in other places. What would be the next step? Who could he reach out to? How could he connect with the right people, either with Mastar or Mubadala, to share what the technology can do, and then to help them start doing some due diligence on it?
So if it's regarding nuclear, it would be Emirates Nuclear Energy Corporation. That's who we would want to connect you with. And they are looking at the small modular reactors. They stay very, very closely engaged in all of the key nuclear energy forums, committees, global committees. in Vienna, at Nuclear Energy Institute in Washington, D.C., you name it, they're part of it, they're engaged, they're in the dialogue. But if you have something particular that you want to go talk to them about, small modular reactor, it would be an introduction that we would make to you to Emirates Nuclear Energy Corporation. That would be the next step. I would ask that you try to do your homework on what they've already, how they're already engaged with regard to that topic, because they have spent a lot of time looking at it. I think if I'm not mistaken, they're working with the Saudis a little bit as well on helping the Saudis consider that technology for how the Saudis might build out their program in the future.
And on the non-nuclear front, the first part of your question, there's a lot of entities in the UAE working on smart cities writ large. One of the main ones is Smart Dubai. They really are making Dubai a test bed, if you will, for certain technologies, and making an effort to be the first place where these technologies are implemented and utilized.
That's great. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Oh, go. Okay, good. Yeah, and we have a couple minutes left. Maybe I'll pause for a second, see if anybody else has any questions, any comments they'd like to make.
Hi, this is Mike with Global Growth. We have a company in the JAFSA free zone, and we've been looking at partnering with somebody on cogen or CHP. Is there anybody you could hook us up with in that sector when we go over? Or is that...
You say another word or two about cogen and CHP? I'm not sure I know the acronym.
So cogeneration is using natural gas in the turbines to reduce the carbon footprint. So we've put that on a couple of temples here in Utah, and it reduces our emissions considerably. And so I'm wondering if that's even a sector that's viable in the UAE.
So the UAE has bought primarily GE's turbines for gas generation, and I would start with connecting you with the right people at GE Power, which I believe is headquartered in Pittsburgh or in Pennsylvania here, and that would be your first point of entry as far as understanding better what the UAE is doing with regard to those technologies, and then we might help you with the generation companies where they're operated, where that equipment is operated, and there might be there for you to connect to see if they want to look at more efficiencies and ways to knock down their carbon output. They're always looking for ways to diminish their carbon footprint. And they have been leaders in those areas in some cases.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Do you have a connection with GE Power already for in their turbine business?
We don't, but we have one with Siemens and Capstone. They're the smaller ones. GE's more in the 100 megawatts, but we're looking for the smaller buildings, the shopping centers or those type. We also have a connection with Williams International here in Ogden that could possibly produce those turbines. So okay. That's our Utah tie. And that
I know that Siemens has a huge footprint in the UAE as well. They're just not, they're a German company, so they're obviously not our member. I don't work directly with them. But you might talk to Siemens and find out what they're doing in this sector in the UAE, and that might be a first place to find some information as well. In these areas, I always try to get companies to go talk to, even though it's competition sensitive in some cases. You share a lot of information with your brothers and sisters in these verticals, and they're going to be more inside the tent, the companies that are doing business there already, and more understanding of some of these partnerships than anyone else. And so I say start there and understand what some of the opportunities and shortcomings might be, and then we might be able to help you connect at a higher level when you're a little smarter, a little more sophisticated on what the Emiratis might need or want going forward.
Okay,
And another thing, Mike, that you should probably hook up with Danny and his group is Mike does a ton in the agricultural field, and just there's so many needs with food, sustainability, et cetera. And they're doing, I think, didn't you say you have some webinar coming up with that in terms of UAE needs? Is that correct? They just did some big conference.
We had a trade mission.
I want to hook up with them on as well, Mike.
We had a trade mission focused on food security in February, and we're going to do a webinar with the Minister of Food Security in the UAE. They have a minister and a ministry devoted to this issue. We're going to do that webinar in 2.5 weeks. So we'd be happy to include any of your companies that are interested in that when we do the webinar. And Mary Zuccarello, who's on the phone or on the conference, is responsible for that sector with the Business Council, and she can work with you, Courtney, to get the details out when we're ready to send them and invite your company.
Mike is the huge go-to guy for agriculture in Utah, so that would be really helpful and very knowledgeable.
We would love that. That'd be awesome. Thank you.
Great.
You're welcome, Michael.
Okay, it looks like we are out of time. Thank you, Danny, David, Rebecca, Mary, for joining the call. We really appreciate it. For everybody listening in, I think there's a few actionable takeaways for you. One thing to keep in mind, that for anybody who's a small business in Utah, we have grants to help offset the cost of growing internationally. So please, as you look at these opportunities, also reach out to us. We'd love to provide a grant to help catalyze your growth, accelerate it, offset some of the costs of making these connections and getting over there when the time is right. But again, we judge our success from these types of meetings not by the content, which has been superb today, but by the positive action that happens after the event as a result of what we've discussed today. So we want to be your partner in that. We want to help offset those costs with our grants and provide our consultations, market research, and everything else. So be in contact with us. We'll make sure that you're connected to the U.S. U.A.E. Business Council, as you already are, and what is abundantly clear. They can be a tremendous resource for making sure you get connected with the right people. So again, Danny and the team, thank you very much. And everybody for joining in, thank you for being with us. We'll be in touch. Bye.
Thank you.